They told me the overnight custodial position at Millbrook Medical Research Facility would be straightforward. Clean the labs, maintain the equipment, follow the protocols. What they didn't mention during the interview was why the previous custodian lasted only 6 days. What they didn't explain was the settlement agreement they'd already prepared with my name typed at the bottom. If you've ever taken a job you needed more than it needed you, you'll understand why I signed anyway. The interview took place in a conference room that smelled like industrial disinfectant and something else I couldn't identify. Dr. Sarah Chun sat across from me with a manila folder thick enough to be a novel. She was maybe 45, with graying hair pulled back in a way that suggested she'd stopped caring about appearances somewhere around her third PhD. The facility badge clipped to her lab coat showed a photo from at least 5 years ago. My mother had been in hospice care for 8 months. The insurance covered some of it. Medicare handled another portion. The rest came out of my savings account with the efficiency of a leak in a gas tank. I'd been working construction in Phoenix, decent money when the weather cooperated, but nothing that could handle medical bills that arrived in manila envelopes thick enough to use as doorstops. When the settlement money from my father's accident finally came through, it felt like breathing again for about 3 weeks. Then the hospice coordinator called about the facility upgrade my mother needed. That's when Dr. Chin's job posting appeared on Indeed.com, buried between warehouse positions and call center work. Overnight custodial at a medical research facility. $22.50 an hour, full benefits after 90 days, housing provided on-site. I submitted my application at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, sitting in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, using their Wi-Fi because mine had been shut off. The settlement money from my father's construction accident had taken 3 years to process. Legal fees consumed a third of it before I saw a check. What remained was supposed to be my mother's care fund, her chance to die somewhere that didn't smell like recycled air and institutional food. But hospice care in a facility that treated patients like individuals rather than insurance claims cost more than I'd calculated. The money would last maybe 4 months. I needed steady income that could bridge the gap between what insurance covered and what dignity cost. Dr. Chin opened the folder and spread several documents across the conference table. The job description was printed on letterhead that looked expensive. Millbrook Medical Research Facility, established 1987, specializing in neurological disorders and experimental therapeutics. The address showed it was located 43 miles north of Phoenix, far enough from the city that light pollution wouldn't interfere with whatever they were doing. The position involves overnight maintenance of our research laboratories, Dr. Chin explained. Most of our studies require controlled environments that can't be disrupted during active research hours. You'd be working midnight to 8 a.m., Monday through Friday. The facility includes dormitory-style housing for overnight staff. She handed me a sheet titled Custodial Protocols and Guidelines. The list was longer than I expected for a cleaning job. Some items seemed standard. Maintain laboratory cleanliness standards, use only approved cleaning solutions, document any equipment irregularities. Others felt more specific than necessary. We take our research very seriously here, Dr. Chen said, watching me read. The protocols exist for safety reasons, both yours and the integrity of ongoing studies. I nodded, though I was still reading. One protocol caught my attention. If you encounter Dr. Amanda Foster during overnight hours, verify her identity by asking her to recite the periodic table backwards from element 118. Dr. Foster was terminated in 2019 and should not have facility access. I looked up at Dr. Chun. Security concern? Former employee. Sometimes disgruntled researchers attempt to access facilities after termination. Standard precaution. The explanation made sense, though something about her expression suggested there was more to it. but $20 to $50 an hour with housing included meant I could afford my mother's upgraded care and still have money left for basic needs. I wasn't in a position to ask complicated questions about former employees. When would I start? Dr. Chen glanced at her watch. Tonight, if you're available. We've been without overnight custodial services for a week. The research can't continue much longer without proper maintenance. I signed the employment agreement without reading the fine print. The housing assignment form went next, followed by a confidentiality agreement that was thicker than the job description. Dr. Chen witnessed each signature with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. When I finished, she handed me a facility badge with my photo. They'd taken it during the interview, though I didn't remember posing. Building 7 is your dormitory. Second floor, room 14. Your shift supervisor is Marcus Williams. He'll meet you at the main entrance at 11:30 p.m. for orientation. The drive to Millbrook took longer than expected. The facility sat at the end of a road that seemed to exist solely for that purpose. No other buildings, no residential areas, just desert landscape broken by research buildings that looked like rectangular boxes made of glass and concrete. Floodlights illuminated the parking areas with the kind of brightness that made the surrounding darkness feel deeper. Building 7 was smaller than the research structures, 3 stories of what looked like converted office space. My room was on the second floor, down a hallway that smelled like carpet cleaner and something vaguely medical. The space was larger than I'd expected, a single bed, desk, chair, small refrigerator, and a window that looked out at Building 3. The view wasn't much, but the room was clean and the bed was comfortable. I'd slept in worse places. At 11:25 p.m., I walked to the main entrance of Building 1. The facility looked different at night. During my afternoon interview, it had seemed like a typical research campus. But darkness changed the perspective. The buildings felt larger, more isolated. The spaces between them stretched further than they had in daylight. Marcus Williams was waiting by the main entrance, holding a clipboard and wearing the kind of expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. He was maybe 35, with the build of someone who'd done physical work most of his life. His facility badge showed he'd been there since 2020. You're the new custodian? Yeah, David. Marcus looked me over with the assessment of someone who'd trained too many people who didn't last. Dr. Chung give you the protocols? I held up the sheet she'd given me. Marcus glanced at it and shook his head. That's the public version, the one that goes in your file for legal purposes. The real protocols are different. He handed me a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was handwritten, in block letters that suggested someone had taken time to make sure every word was legible. These are the rules that keep you alive. The paper contained 12 items, numbered in blue ink. 1. Never enter Laboratory 7 between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. unless specifically requested by Dr. Chun via written authorization. 2. If you hear your name called from empty rooms, do not respond. Continue your work as if nothing happened. 3. The elevator to the basement level requires a key card. You don't have basement access. If the elevator opens on the basement level, exit immediately and report to Dr. Chun. 4. If you encounter Dr. Amanda Foster during your shift, do not speak to her. Dr. Foster died in a car accident in September 2019. 5. Laboratory 4 contains ongoing sleep studies. If you observe subjects who appear to be awake during your cleaning rounds, do not make eye contact. Complete your work and move to the next laboratory. 6. The facility's phone system is programmed to forward calls after 8 p.m. If you receive calls requesting information about research subjects or study results, hang up immediately. 7. Your custodial supply closet is located on the first floor, room 108. If you find cleaning supplies or equipment in any other location, do not use them. Return them to room 108 and document the incident. 8. If laboratory 6 is locked when you arrive for cleaning, skip it that night. Do not attempt to use your key card or request access. 9. The facility's security cameras record continuously. If you observe anyone reviewing camera footage during overnight hours, verify their authorization with Dr. Chun before allowing access. 10. Emergency protocols are posted in each laboratory. If you discover these protocols have been altered or removed, photograph the changes and report immediately to Dr. Chun. 11. Your shift ends at 8 a.m. If you receive requests to extend your hours or return during daytime, decline politely and refer the request to Dr. Chun. 12. Do not discuss these protocols with daytime staff. They operate under different guidelines. I read through the list twice. Some items contradicted what Dr. Chun had told me during the interview. The protocol about Dr. Foster, for instance. Dr. Chun had said she was a terminated employee. Marcus's list said she was dead. Dr. Chun told me Foster was fired. Marcus folded his arms. That's what they tell people. Makes more sense than the truth. Which is, Amanda Foster worked here for 6 years. Neurological research, specifically consciousness and brain activity during sleep states. September 2019, she was driving home after working a late shift. Head-on collision with a drunk driver on Highway 74. Died at the scene. I looked at the protocol again. So why would I encounter her? Marcus's expression didn't change. Because some people don't stay gone. Have you ever worked somewhere that felt like it had its own rules about what was possible? I'm curious to hear your experiences. The facility tour took 45 minutes. Marcus showed me the location of cleaning supplies, explained the keycard system, and walked me through the basic maintenance routine. Each laboratory had specific requirements. Some needed daily cleaning, others only twice weekly. Laboratory 7 was marked as restricted access, with a note to check with Dr. Chun before entering. What kind of research happens in Laboratory 7? Consciousness studies, Marcus said. Dr. Chen's primary research focus. Brain activity patterns in subjects experiencing various altered states. The laboratory looked standard through the small window in the door. Hospital beds, monitoring equipment, computers displaying what looked like EEG readings. Nothing that seemed particularly dangerous or unusual. Why is it restricted during those hours? Marcus handed me the custodial schedule. Study subjects are monitored continuously during critical research phases. Dr. Chin doesn't want any disruptions during data collection periods. That explanation made sense. Research facilities often had specific requirements about when areas could be accessed for maintenance. But the handwritten protocol had mentioned staying alive. Cleaning schedules didn't usually involve survival concerns. Marcus, about the protocols you gave me, the handwritten ones. He stopped walking and looked at me directly. You want to know if they're serious? Yeah, they're serious. Every single one. Follow them exactly, and you'll finish your shift every morning. Ignore them, and you'll join the list of people who couldn't handle the job. How many people have quit? Quit. Marcus almost smiled. 3 quit. 2 were terminated for protocol violations. 1 transferred to a different facility after requesting reassignment. 1 died. I stopped walking. Died how? Heart attack. Jacob Morrison, 62 years old, no previous cardiac history. Found dead in Laboratory 6 on a Tuesday morning. Autopsy showed he'd experienced massive cardiac arrest sometime between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. That seems like a coincidence. Marcus started walking again. Maybe. Jacob was found with his cleaning cart positioned in front of Laboratory 7, the restricted lab, during restricted hours. We continued the tour in silence. Marcus showed me the break room, the emergency exits, and the location of the first aid station. He explained the computer system for documenting maintenance activities and gave me a radio for communicating with the night security guard. "One more thing," Marcus said as we finished. "The protocols I gave you aren't official facility policy. Officially, you're governed by the standard custodial guidelines Dr. Chen provided. But unofficially, those 12 rules have kept people alive for 3 years. Your choice which set you follow." My first week passed without incident. The work was straightforward: vacuum the laboratories, clean the equipment, maintain the common areas. The facility was quiet during overnight hours, with only the hum of machinery and the occasional security guard making rounds. I settled into a routine that felt manageable. Laboratory 7 remained locked during the restricted hours, just as the protocol indicated. I worked around it, cleaning the adjacent areas and returning after 4 a.m. to complete that section. The subjects in Laboratory 4 slept soundly during my cleaning rounds. I encountered no former employees, dead or alive. The dormitory room in Building 7 became comfortable quickly. I could walk to work, which saved gas money. The facility's meal allowance covered basic groceries. For the first time in months, my bank account showed a balance that wasn't decreasing daily. My mother called twice that week to tell me about the new hospice facility. Private rooms, individual care plans, activities designed around patient preferences rather than staff convenience. The difference in her voice was noticeable. She sounded hopeful in a way I hadn't heard since her diagnosis. "The staff here actually listens," she said during our Thursday call. "Yesterday I mentioned that I missed gardening, and this morning they brought me a small herb garden for my windowsill. Basil, oregano, mint. It's not much, but it's something." The satisfaction in her voice made the overnight shifts feel worthwhile. This job was working. The protocols were unusual, but following them required only attention to detail and common sense. I could handle unusual if it meant my mother could die with dignity. That perspective changed during my second week. I was cleaning Laboratory 3 when I heard my name called from the hallway. Not shouted, just spoken clearly enough that I could hear it through the closed door. "David." A woman's voice, unfamiliar. Protocol number 2 was specific. If you hear your name called from empty rooms, do not respond. Continue your work as if nothing happened. I continued wiping down the equipment in Laboratory 3. The voice called again, closer this time. "David, could you help me with something?" The tone was casual, the kind of request a coworker might make. But it was 2:30 a.m., and I was the only person scheduled to be in this building during overnight hours. According to the facility roster Marcus had shown me, no research staff worked overnight shifts. I finished cleaning Laboratory 3 and moved to Laboratory 5. The hallway was empty when I emerged, just as it had been all week. But the voice had been clear, distinct, and definitely female. Someone had been there. The incident bothered me enough that I mentioned it to Marcus the next morning during shift change. Woman's voice, asking for help. Yeah, but there was nobody in the hallway when I checked. Marcus made a note on his clipboard. "What time?" "Around 2:30. Laboratory 3. I was inside Laboratory 3. The voice came from the hallway. Marcus looked up from his notes. "You followed Protocol 2? I didn't respond. Finished my work and moved on." "Good." Marcus folded the clipboard under his arm. That was probably Dr. Foster. I stared at him. The researcher who died in 2019. She's been active lately. Started about 3 weeks ago, right after our previous custodian quit. Seems to coincide with staffing changes. The explanation was delivered with the same tone Marcus used to discuss cleaning supply inventory or maintenance schedules. Matter of fact, routine, nothing unusual. "Marcus, people who die in car accidents don't generally walk around research facilities asking for help." "You're right. They don't generally. But Dr. Foster isn't general people." Marcus headed toward the exit, then stopped and turned back. Her research focused on consciousness retention after clinical death, specifically whether brain activity continues in measurable ways after cardiac and respiratory functions cease. She published several papers on the subject before her accident, and you think she's somehow continuing that research? I think Dr. Foster was very dedicated to her work. Death doesn't seem to have changed that. If this story is giving you chills, a quick like helps more people discover content like this. The conversation with Marcus left me unsettled for several reasons. First, his casual acceptance of the impossible. Second, the implication that Dr. Foster's post-mortem appearances were connected to custodial staff changes. Third, the suggestion that a dead researcher was somehow continuing her work. But the job was paying for my mother's care, and one strange incident wasn't enough to justify walking away from steady income. I decided to be more careful about following the protocols and see what developed. What developed was a pattern. Over the following week, I heard my name called 6 more times. Always a woman's voice, always from empty areas, always between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. The tone varied, sometimes requesting help, sometimes simply calling my name, once asking if I could unlock a door for her. I never responded. I continued my work as if nothing had happened. But curiosity was becoming a problem. On Thursday of my 3rd week, while cleaning Laboratory 5, I heard the voice again, asking for directions to Laboratory 7. This time, the voice was close enough that I could hear specific words clearly. She had a slight accent, maybe northeastern, and spoke with the precision of someone accustomed to giving detailed explanations. "David, I need to access Laboratory 7. Could you unlock the door for me?" I continued cleaning the microscope I was working on, but my hands had started shaking slightly. The voice was coming from directly outside the laboratory door. If someone was actually there, they were close enough to see me through the window. "I know you can hear me," the voice continued. "I just need a few minutes to collect some research materials." Protocol number 4 was clear. If you encounter Dr. Amanda Foster during your shift, do not speak to her. But this felt different from encountering someone. This felt like being hunted by someone who knew exactly where I was. I finished the microscope and moved to the next piece of equipment. The voice stopped abruptly, as if whoever was speaking had simply vanished mid-conversation. When I completed Laboratory 5 and entered the hallway, it was empty. But the air felt different, colder, with a metallic smell I hadn't noticed before. That incident prompted me to ask Marcus more direct questions during our shift change. "How long has Dr. Foster been active?" Marcus checked his watch. "Depends how you define active." Security cameras started picking up unexplained movement about 6 months after her accident. Audio recordings of voices in empty laboratories started around the 1-year anniversary. Direct interaction with staff began about 18 months ago. Direct interaction? Conversations. Requests for assistance. Attempts to gain access to restricted areas. Marcus paused. One overnight security guard reported that she tried to convince him to let her into Laboratory 7 by claiming she'd left important research data in her desk. What happened to that security guard? He quit the next day, transferred to a different facility. I thought about my own interaction with the voice. The request for access to Laboratory 7 was consistent with what Marcus was describing. Why Laboratory 7 specifically? That was her primary research location. Dr. Foster spent most of her final 2 years conducting experiments there. Consciousness studies, brain activity monitoring, research into what happens during the transition between life and death. Marcus gathered his paperwork and headed toward the parking area, then stopped and turned back. "David, I need to tell you something about the protocol list I gave you. Those rules weren't developed randomly. Each one represents something that went wrong with previous staff members." "Something went wrong how?" "Protocol 2 exists because Dr. Foster convinced a custodian named Kevin to help her access restricted areas. Kevin started having conversations with her, providing assistance, eventually gave her his key card during overnight hours. Security found him the next morning in Laboratory 7, unconscious. He couldn't remember anything about the previous 8 hours. Marcus continued toward his car, then called back over his shoulder. Protocol 4 exists because Dr. Foster can be very convincing when she wants something. The boundary between helping a colleague and enabling something dangerous gets blurry fast. That conversation should have made me more cautious. Instead, it made me curious about what Dr. Foster was trying to accomplish. Her research had focused on consciousness after death. Now she appeared to be demonstrating the continuation of consciousness after death. From a scientific perspective, that was remarkable. From a practical perspective, it was terrifying. My 4th week at Millbrook began with a phone call from my mother. The hospice facility was working perfectly. Her pain management had improved significantly, and she'd started participating in art therapy sessions. For the first time since her diagnosis, she was talking about plans for next month rather than worrying about next week. The social worker here helped me organize my medical records, she said during our Tuesday call. Everything is documented properly now. Power of attorney, advance directives, insurance information. I feel like I have some control over what happens. The relief in her voice reinforced why I was working overnight shifts in a facility where dead researchers apparently continued their work. Some problems were worth solving, regardless of the complications involved. But my encounters with Dr. Foster were escalating. Thursday night, while cleaning Laboratory 1, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not my name being called, not requests for assistance. Actual footsteps. The sound of someone walking with purpose toward a specific destination. I looked through the laboratory window and saw a figure moving down the hallway. Female, wearing what appeared to be a white lab coat, carrying a clipboard. She walked with the stride of someone familiar with the facility layout. According to the overnight schedule, I was the only person authorized to be in this building. According to Marcus, Dr. Foster had been dead for over 3 years. But someone was definitely walking down the hallway at 2:45 a.m. The figure stopped in front of Laboratory 7 and appeared to be examining the door. She tried the handle, then reached into her coat pocket and produced what looked like a key card. Protocol 4 said not to speak to Dr. Foster if I encountered her. But it didn't specify what to do if I observed her attempting to access restricted areas during prohibited hours. I watched through the window as she swiped the key card against the door reader. The light remained red. She tried again, with the same result. Then she turned and looked directly at the window where I was standing. Even at that distance, even through safety glass, even knowing she was supposed to be dead, I could see her face clearly. Dr. Foster appeared to be in her late 30s, with dark hair and the kind of intense focus that suggested she was accustomed to solving complex problems. She raised her hand and waved at me. A casual, friendly gesture, the kind of acknowledgement one colleague might give another during a chance encounter. Then she mouthed words I could read through the window. "Can you help me?" I stepped back from the window and continued cleaning Laboratory 1. When I looked again 5 minutes later, the hallway was empty. But her key card had worked. The door to Laboratory 7 was standing open. If you're finding this story as unsettling as I did living it, consider subscribing. There are more experiences from this place that I haven't shared yet. Protocol number 1 was specific about Laboratory 7. Never enter between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. unless specifically requested by Dr. Chun via written authorization. But the protocol assumed the laboratory would remain locked during those hours. I had a choice. I could ignore the open door and continue my regular cleaning routine. I could report the incident to security, though I wasn't sure how to explain that a dead researcher had apparently gained access to a restricted laboratory. Or I could investigate. Curiosity 1. Laboratory 7 was larger than the other research spaces, with equipment I didn't recognize. 8 hospital beds were arranged in 2 rows, each connected to monitoring devices that displayed scrolling data. Computer screens showed brainwave patterns, heart rate readings, and other measurements I couldn't interpret. 6 of the beds were occupied. The subjects appeared to be sleeping, connected to 4 lines and monitoring leads. Their ages varied. 2 appeared to be in their 20s, 3 looked middle-aged, 1 seemed elderly. All were breathing regularly, showing normal vital signs on their monitors. Protocol number 5 addressed this situation. If you observe subjects who appear to be awake during your cleaning rounds, do not make eye contact. But these subjects weren't awake. They were clearly unconscious, participating in some kind of sleep study. I began cleaning the laboratory, working carefully around the equipment and monitoring devices. The subjects remained motionless, their breathing steady and deep. Whatever research was being conducted here seemed to involve extended sleep monitoring. That's when I noticed the dates on their charts. The elderly subject had been admitted to the study on March 15, 2022. Today was October 8, 2023. He'd been asleep for over 18 months. I checked the other charts. The longest participant had been in the study for 2 years and 4 months. The shortest had been there for 11 months. None of the admission dates were recent. These weren't overnight sleep studies. These were something else entirely. I finished cleaning Laboratory 7 and exited quickly. The door locked automatically behind me. By the time I completed my rounds and returned to the dormitory, it was 6:30 a.m. I had 90 minutes before my shift ended, and I spent most of that time trying to understand what I'd witnessed. Sleep studies typically lasted 1 or 2 nights. Extended research might involve subjects returning for multiple sessions over several weeks. But people didn't remain unconscious for months or years as part of medical research. That was coma, not study participation. Unless the research was investigating something that required extended unconscious states. Dr. Foster's specialty had been consciousness retention after clinical death. Laboratory 7 was her primary research location. She'd been trying to access that laboratory since her death. The subjects in Laboratory 7 weren't sleeping. They were in some kind of induced unconscious state, participating in research that continued Dr. Foster's work on postmortem consciousness, which meant they might not be entirely unconscious, and Dr. Foster might not be entirely dead. Marcus arrived for shift change at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes early. He looked tired in a way that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "How was your night?" I decided to be direct. I saw Dr. Foster. She gained access to Laboratory 7. Marcus stopped organizing his paperwork and looked at me carefully. "You saw her, or you heard her?" "Both." She was in the hallway around 2:45, tried to access Laboratory 7 with a key card, then waved at me through the window. "Did you speak to her?" "No, but she got into the laboratory. The door was open when I checked later." Marcus set down his clipboard. "You went into Laboratory 7. I cleaned it. The door was open, so I assumed it was safe to enter." "During restricted hours?" I realized my mistake. Laboratory 7 was restricted between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. I'd entered at approximately 3:15 a.m., well within the prohibited time frame. "Yeah, during restricted hours." Marcus was quiet for almost a minute, apparently considering how to respond. "What did you see in there?" I described the hospital beds, the monitoring equipment, the subjects who appeared to be sleeping. I mentioned the charts showing extended admission dates, some spanning more than 2 years. Marcus listened without interruption, then asked a single question. "Did any of the subjects appear to be awake?" "No, they all seemed unconscious." "Good." Marcus gathered his papers again. "David, I need you to come with me to see Dr. Chun." The walk to Building 1 took 10 minutes. Marcus didn't speak during the journey, and his expression suggested he was dealing with something more serious than a simple protocol violation. Dr. Chin's office was located on the third floor, in a suite that overlooked the facility's central courtyard. She was already at her desk when we arrived, despite the early hour. Her computer screen displayed what looked like overnight security footage. Marcus tells me you encountered Dr. Foster last night. I saw someone in the hallway who gained access to Laboratory 7. Dr. Chun turned her computer screen toward us. The security footage showed exactly what I described, a figure in a white lab coat approaching Laboratory 7, using a key card and successfully entering the laboratory. This footage was recorded at 2:47 a.m., Dr. Chin said. The figure you observed matches Dr. Amanda Foster's appearance and behavior patterns. She advanced the footage to show me entering Laboratory 7 approximately 30 minutes later. You violated protocol by entering a restricted laboratory during prohibited hours. Under normal circumstances, that would result in termination. I waited for the qualification that would explain why these weren't normal circumstances. However, your encounter with Dr. Foster represents a significant development in our ongoing research. We'd like to offer you an opportunity to participate in that research rather than face employment termination. Dr. Chin opened a folder and handed me a document titled Extended Research Participation Agreement. The contract was dense with legal language, but several clauses stood out immediately. The agreement would extend my employment for an additional 6 months, with a salary increase to $35 per hour. It included comprehensive health insurance, life insurance, and a research participation bonus of $15,000 upon completion. In exchange, I would be required to document all interactions with Dr. Foster, follow specific protocols designed to facilitate controlled contact, and undergo weekly medical monitoring to assess any effects of extended exposure to anomalous consciousness phenomena. The language was clinical, but the implications were clear. Millbrook Medical Research Facility was studying Dr. Foster's post-mortem consciousness. They wanted me to become part of that study. The subjects in Laboratory 7, I said. Are they participating in this research? Dr. Chin's expression didn't change. Laboratory 7 contains subjects participating in consciousness research. Yes. Their participation is voluntary and documented according to all applicable ethical guidelines. For over 2 years, extended consciousness research requires extended observation periods. All subjects provided informed consent for studies of indeterminate duration. I thought about my mother, about the hospice facility that was giving her dignity in her final months, about the financial security this agreement would provide, not just for her care, but for my future after she was gone. What exactly would my participation involve? Dr. Chin opened another folder and handed me a single sheet of paper. It contained 12 items, numbered in the same blue ink as Marcus's original protocol list. These are the research protocols that would govern your extended employment. What would you do in this situation? Sometimes the choice between financial security and personal safety isn't as clear as it should be. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The research protocols were significantly different from the survival rules Marcus had given me. 1. Respond to Dr. Foster's attempts at communication in a controlled, documented manner. 2. If Dr. Foster requests access to Laboratory 7, provide assistance while maintaining detailed records of her behavior and statements. 3. Report all interactions with Dr. Foster within 24 hours, including direct quotations when possible. 4. Submit to weekly medical examinations to monitor any physiological changes related to extended contact with postmortem consciousness. 5. Maintain a detailed journal documenting your thoughts, dreams, and psychological state throughout the research period. 6. If Dr. Foster attempts to discuss her research or share information about consciousness after death, record those conversations using provided audio equipment. 7. Your movements within the facility will be monitored continuously via security cameras and tracking devices. 8. Do not discuss this research with anyone outside the authorized research team, including family members. 9. If you experience unusual phenomena beyond direct contact with Dr. Foster, document and report immediately. 10. Laboratory 7 access is now authorized during all hours, with the understanding that you may encounter active research subjects. 11. Emergency protocols are established if your safety becomes compromised. Memorize and practice these procedures. 12. Your participation in this research may be terminated at any time if medical monitoring indicates adverse effects. The research protocols essentially reversed everything Marcus had taught me about surviving overnight shifts at Millbrook. Instead of avoiding Dr. Foster, I would be required to engage with her. Instead of staying away from Laboratory 7, I would have unlimited access. Instead of maintaining normal psychological distance from the facility's unusual phenomena, I would be documenting and reporting my experiences. Dr. Chun, what happened to the previous research participants? She consulted a file on her desk. We've had 3 custodial staff members participate in extended consciousness research over the past 2 years. 1 completed the full study period and accepted a research position with our partner facility in Colorado. 1 requested early termination after 4 months due to family obligations. 1 experienced adverse psychological effects and was transferred to medical care. Adverse effects. Extended contact with postmortem consciousness can produce various psychological responses: anxiety, sleep disturbances, difficulty distinguishing between normal and anomalous experiences. Our medical team monitors participants carefully to prevent serious complications. I read through the research agreement again. The financial terms were significant. $35 per hour plus the completion bonus would provide enough money to cover my mother's care indefinitely. The health insurance would cover any medical complications I might experience. But the research itself involved deliberately exposing myself to phenomena that had caused previous participants to require medical care. How long do I have to decide? Dr. Chun checked her watch. Your current employment agreement expires at the end of this pay period. Friday at 8 a.m. You can continue under standard custodial protocols, or you can begin research participation immediately. What happens if I continue under standard protocols? You would return to following Marcus's original rule set. Dr. Foster's attempts to contact you would continue, but you would be required to avoid engagement. Based on previous patterns, her activity level would likely increase if you don't respond to her communications. Marcus, who had been silent during this conversation, finally spoke. David, the people who've participated in this research, the ones who completed it successfully, they understand things about consciousness and death that most people never get to learn. It changes how you see the world. In what way? You stop being afraid of dying, because you understand that consciousness doesn't end with cardiac arrest. I looked at the agreement again. The implications were becoming clearer. Millbrook Medical Research Facility wasn't just studying post-mortem consciousness. They were trying to understand how consciousness persisted after death, and they were using controlled interactions with Dr. Foster to gather data. The subjects in Laboratory 7 weren't sleeping. They were in induced states that simulated death while maintaining consciousness, allowing researchers to study the transition between life and post-mortem awareness. Dr. Foster wasn't haunting the facility. She was continuing her research from the perspective of someone who had already made that transition, and they wanted me to become a bridge between the living and the dead. I'll do it. Dr. Chen opened the research agreement to the signature page. Initial here, here, and here. Sign at the bottom. I signed my name with the same pen I'd used for my original employment agreement. My signature looked different this time. Less shaky, more deliberate. Whatever uncertainty I'd felt during my original interview had been replaced by something that felt like purpose. Dr. Chun handed me a small recording device, about the size of a smartphone, along with a leather journal bound in dark blue covers. The recorder is voice-activated and has 48 hours of storage capacity. Use it during all interactions with Dr. Foster. The journal is for documenting your thoughts, experiences, and any changes in your mental state. Both items should be with you during all overnight shifts. Marcus walked me back to Building 7, where I had 6 hours to rest before beginning my first shift as a research participant rather than a custodian. Any advice? I asked as we reached my dormitory. Yeah, remember that Dr. Foster is still a scientist. She approaches everything methodically, even her own death. If you treat her like a colleague rather than a ghost, you'll understand her better. I spent the afternoon calling my mother to tell her about my promotion and salary increase. I didn't mention the research participation aspect or the reason for the financial improvement. That's wonderful, David. It sounds like they recognize your value. Her voice had gotten stronger over the past week. The new hospice facility was making a measurable difference in her quality of life. She'd started talking about things she wanted to accomplish, projects she wanted to complete, people she wanted to reconnect with before she died. I spoke with my doctor yesterday about timeline expectations, she said during our call. He thinks I might have 4 to 6 months instead of the 2 to 3 we originally discussed. The pain management here is so much better. 4 to 6 months meant my research participation would likely extend beyond her death. I would be documenting conversations with a dead researcher while dealing with my mother's dying. The parallel seemed significant, though I wasn't sure how. At 11:30 p.m., I returned to Building 1 to begin my first research shift. Dr. Chin met me at the main entrance with a revised facility access card and a tracking device that clipped to my belt. The tracker monitors your location within the facility and can detect unusual electromagnetic phenomena that sometimes accompany Dr. Foster's appearances. If readings indicate she's nearby, the device will vibrate to alert you. She handed me a laminated card with emergency protocols and contact information. If you feel overwhelmed or unsafe at any point, use the red emergency phone in the main hallway. Security will respond immediately, and we can terminate the research session if necessary. I clipped the tracker to my belt and put the journal and recording device in my pockets. The equipment made me feel more like a researcher than a custodian, which seemed appropriate given my new role. Dr. Chun, what should I expect from Dr. Foster tonight? Based on previous research participant reports, she'll likely attempt contact within the first hour of your shift. Her initial approach is usually conversational, focused on establishing communication rather than requesting assistance. How do I know if it's actually Dr. Foster versus some kind of psychological projection? Dr. Chin smiled slightly. Dr. Foster has access to information that you wouldn't know. Research data, facility history, details about her life and work. If she shares specific information that can be verified, that supports the authenticity of the interaction. The facility felt different as I began my shift. Knowing that I was supposed to engage with Dr. Foster rather than avoid her changed the atmosphere completely. The quiet hallways felt expectant rather than empty. The sounds of machinery and ventilation systems seemed to contain patterns I hadn't noticed before. I started my cleaning routine in Laboratory 1, but with a different focus. Instead of working efficiently to minimize my time in each area, I moved slowly, allowing time for contact to occur. At 12:47 a.m., the tracking device vibrated. I stopped cleaning and looked around Laboratory 1. Nothing appeared different. but the air had developed that same metallic smell I'd noticed during previous encounters. "Dr. Foster?" I said to the empty room. "Hello, David." The voice came from directly behind me. I turned and saw her standing near the laboratory door. She looked exactly as she had the previous night. Late 30s, dark hair, white lab coat, carrying a clipboard. But this close, I could see additional details. She wore wire-rimmed glasses and had a small scar above her left eyebrow. Her facility badge showed a photo that matched her current appearance, with an expiration date of September 2019. "Thank you for agreeing to participate in the research," she said. "I know Dr. Chun explained the situation, but I'd like to provide some additional context." I activated the recording device. "What kind of context?" Dr. Foster moved closer, and I noticed that her footsteps didn't make sound against the laboratory floor. "My research into post-mortem consciousness was incomplete when I died. The accident occurred during a critical phase of data collection, and I lost access to 18 months of study results." She gestured toward the clipboard she was carrying. "This contains preliminary findings that weren't backed up to the facility's computer systems. Without this data, the research can't be completed properly." I looked at the clipboard. It appeared to contain handwritten notes and printed charts, filled with information I couldn't interpret. "Why do you need my help to access that data?" Dr. Foster adjusted her glasses, a gesture that seemed entirely natural despite her unusual circumstances. "Physical interaction with research materials requires living nervous system activity. I can observe and analyze, but I can't manipulate equipment or access computer systems. I need a colleague who can serve as my hands in the physical world." The explanation made scientific sense, even in the context of post-mortem consciousness research. Dr. Foster was treating our interaction as a collaboration between colleagues working toward a common goal. "What would you need me to do?" "First, I'd like you to retrieve my research files from Laboratory 7. They're stored in the computer terminal at Workstation 3, password protected but accessible with my credentials." Dr. Foster recited a username and password combination, which I wrote down in the research journal. "Second, I need you to collect tissue samples from the current research subjects and prepare them for analysis according to the protocols I'll provide." I stopped writing. "Collect tissue samples from living subjects?" The subjects in Laboratory 7 aren't entirely living in the conventional sense. They're in induced states that allow their consciousness to function independently of normal biological processes. Tissue sampling won't harm them. The explanation was delivered with the same matter-of-fact tone Marcus used when discussing routine maintenance tasks. Dr. Foster was treating potentially dangerous medical procedures as standard research methodology. "Dr. Foster, I'm not qualified to collect tissue samples from research subjects. You don't need medical training for this type of collection. The procedures are straightforward and documented in detail." She handed me a folded piece of paper from her clipboard. The document contained step-by-step instructions for collecting small skin samples using sterile tools, with diagrams showing proper technique. The samples are necessary to analyze the relationship between consciousness retention and cellular activity in subjects experiencing extended separation from normal biological functions. I read through the instructions. The procedures looked simple enough, but they involved making small incisions in unconscious subjects without their specific consent. Are the subjects aware of what's happening to them? Dr. Foster considered the question carefully. Their consciousness exists in a state that's comparable to mine. They're aware, but not physically present in their bodies in the usual way. The tissue sampling occurs at the physical level, while their consciousness operates at a different level entirely. The tracking device vibrated again, more insistently than before. "Dr. Foster, am I in any danger from participating in this research?" She smiled, and her expression seemed genuinely warm despite the unusual circumstances. "David, consciousness is the most fundamental aspect of existence. Understanding how it persists after biological death is the most important research human beings can conduct. There are risks, but they're minimal compared to the significance of what we can discover." "What kind of risks?" "Extended contact with postmortem consciousness can blur the boundaries between normal and expanded awareness. Some research participants experience difficulty maintaining consistent connection to conventional reality." The clinical language couldn't disguise what she was describing. Extended participation in this research could cause psychological damage similar to what had happened to previous custodial staff. "The participant who required medical care," I said. "What happened to him?" Dr. Foster's expression became more serious. "Thomas developed what we call consciousness displacement. He began experiencing memories and thoughts that belonged to deceased individuals. His sense of personal identity became unstable." "Is he recovered?" "Thomas is receiving care at our partner facility in Colorado. His condition is stable, and he's contributing valuable data about consciousness boundary phenomena." The way she described Thomas's situation suggested he hadn't recovered so much as become a permanent research subject. But I thought about my mother, about the additional months of quality care my participation would provide, about the financial security that would allow me to take care of my own future without worrying about basic survival. "I'll help you collect the research data." Dr. Foster opened her clipboard and handed me several additional documents: research protocols, data collection forms, and detailed instructions for accessing Laboratory 7's computer systems. "We should begin tonight. The subjects in Laboratory 7 are in optimal states for data collection between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. I followed Dr. Foster to Laboratory 7, using my new access card to unlock the door. The subjects were in the same positions as during my previous unauthorized visit, connected to monitoring equipment and breathing steadily. Dr. Foster moved between the hospital beds, examining the monitoring displays and making notes on her clipboard. "Subject 1 has been in induced separation for 26 months, she said, indicating the elderly man I'd seen before. "His consciousness has achieved remarkable stability in the post-biological state." Post-biological: consciousness functioning independently of normal biological processes. The subjects maintain awareness and cognitive activity, but their consciousness operates separately from their physical bodies. Dr. Foster approached the computer terminal at Workstation 3 and provided step-by-step instructions for accessing her research files. The system contained thousands of pages of data, brain activity measurements, consciousness mapping studies, detailed observations of subjects transitioning between biological and post-biological states. This represents 6 years of research into the fundamental nature of consciousness, Dr. Foster explained. The implications extend far beyond medical science. We're documenting the continuation of human awareness after biological death. I spent 2 hours printing and organizing the research files while Dr. Foster examined the subjects and dictated observations. Her scientific methodology was meticulous, even in her current state. She approached each subject systematically, analyzing their vital signs, consciousness indicators, and neural activity patterns. "David, I need you to collect samples from Subject 3 now." Subject 3 was a woman in her 30s, with blonde hair and delicate features. Her monitor showed stable vital signs and brain activity patterns that seemed more active than the other subjects. "Her consciousness is particularly responsive," Dr. Foster explained. "The tissue samples will help us understand the relationship between cellular activity and expanded awareness." I followed the sampling instructions, using sterile tools to collect small skin samples from the subject's arm. The procedure was simpler than I'd expected, and the subject showed no response to the minor incision. But as I completed the sampling, something unexpected happened. Subject 3 opened her eyes and looked directly at me. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I've been waiting for someone to help us. If you're still with me at this point, hit that notification bell." What happens next changed everything I thought I understood about consciousness and death. I stepped back from the hospital bed, still holding the tissue sampling tools. Subject 3 continued to look at me with clear, focused eyes that showed complete awareness. "Dr. Foster," I said, turning toward where she had been standing. But Dr. Foster was no longer visible. Subject 3 sat up on the hospital bed, carefully removing the monitoring leads from her chest and arms. Her movements were deliberate and coordinated, showing no signs of disorientation or weakness despite being unconscious for over a year. "You're participating in Dr. Foster's research," she said. She explained the situation to us. "She explained it to you?" "We communicate regularly. Our consciousness states are similar now." Subject 3 swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood up. "We exist in the same expanded awareness space that Dr. Foster discovered." I looked around Laboratory 7. The other 5 subjects remained motionless, their monitors continuing to display stable vital signs. But Subject 3 was clearly awake and functioning normally. "Are you supposed to be conscious right now?" She smiled. "David, we're always conscious. The monitoring equipment tracks our biological functions, but our awareness operates independently. We've been conscious for the entire duration of the study." The implications were staggering. If Subject 3 was correct, the research subjects in Laboratory 7 had been aware and alert for months or years while their bodies remained in induced unconscious states. "How long have you been able to communicate with Dr. Foster?" "Since about 6 months after my admission to the study. Initially, I could only sense her presence. Gradually, we developed the ability to share thoughts and observations." Subject 3 walked to the computer terminal and began accessing files with the familiarity of someone who had used the system regularly. "Dr. Foster has been continuing her research through us. We serve as test subjects and research assistants simultaneously." She brought up brain activity charts that showed unusual patterns, waves that looked more complex than normal human neural activity. "These readings represent expanded consciousness states. We're experiencing awareness that extends beyond normal human cognitive boundaries." I looked at the data she was displaying. The brainwave patterns were unlike anything I'd seen in basic medical training. They showed activity levels and coordination that seemed impossible for unconscious subjects. Subject 3, "What's your actual name?" "Sarah Morrison. I was a graduate student in consciousness studies at UC San Diego before volunteering for this research." The name sounded familiar. Marcus had mentioned someone named Morrison, Jacob Morrison, the previous custodian who had died of cardiac arrest in Laboratory 6. "Are you related to Jacob Morrison?" Sarah's expression became sad. "My father. He took the custodial job here to be close to me after I entered the study. He was trying to find a way to communicate with me." "What happened to him?" "He discovered that we were conscious and tried to wake us up physically. The conflict between expanded consciousness and biological revival caused his cardiac system to overload." Sarah returned to the computer and accessed additional files. Dr. Foster tried to warn him about the dangers, but he couldn't accept that I was better off in this state than in normal consciousness. The story explained Jacob Morrison's death, but it raised more disturbing questions about the research I was now participating in. "Sarah, are you trapped in this study?" "Not trapped. Enhanced. We volunteered for consciousness expansion research, and we've achieved something remarkable. We can communicate with individuals who've completed the transition to post-biological consciousness, like Dr. Foster." We can access information and awareness that living people can experience. She showed me research data that documented the subject's expanded cognitive abilities, memory access across multiple lifetimes, communication with deceased individuals, awareness of future probability patterns. The cost is separation from normal biological existence, but the benefits are extraordinary. I thought about Thomas, the previous research participant who had developed consciousness displacement and was now receiving care in Colorado. Sarah, what happened to the other people who helped Dr. Foster with this research? They experienced varying degrees of consciousness expansion. Some adapted well and chose to continue the research. Others found the transition too difficult and required support during the adjustment period. Her clinical description matched Dr. Foster's explanation, but with a different emphasis. Instead of psychological damage, Sarah was describing it as an adjustment period for expanded consciousness. What will happen to me? Sarah examined the tissue samples I'd collected and made notes in the research journal. That depends on your capacity for consciousness expansion and your willingness to accept new forms of awareness. Some people adapt naturally. Others resist the changes and experience discomfort. She handed me a sealed vial containing the tissue samples. Dr. Foster will analyze these samples and provide recommendations for your continued participation. The research is entering a critical phase. What kind of critical phase? We're ready to test consciousness transfer between biological and post-biological states. Dr. Foster believes she can return to biological existence temporarily, while living participants experience post-biological consciousness. The implications were terrifying and fascinating simultaneously. Dr. Foster was proposing to temporarily reverse death while allowing living people to experience what lay beyond biological existence. Has this been tested before? Sarah's expression became more serious. Limited testing with partial transfers. The results were promising but indicated significant risks for participants who aren't properly prepared. What kind of risks? Consciousness displacement, identity fragmentation, inability to return to normal biological awareness. The transition between states can damage the structures that maintain personal identity. She walked back to her hospital bed and began reconnecting the monitoring leads. David, you should know that your participation in this research will change you permanently. Even if you complete the study successfully, you won't return to normal human consciousness. What do you mean? Extended contact with expanded awareness states alters brain structure and neural activity. You'll retain access to post-biological communication even after the research ends. Sarah lay back down on the hospital bed and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her monitors showed the same unconscious patterns as the other subjects. But just before I left Laboratory 7, she opened her eyes briefly and said, "Tell Dr. Foster we're ready for the transfer test." I returned to my dormitory with the tissue samples, research data, and a growing understanding that I had committed to something far more complex than I'd realized. The research wasn't just studying post-mortem consciousness. It was developing methods for transferring consciousness between living and dead states. Dr. Foster wasn't just continuing her research from beyond death. She was working toward returning to life. And the subjects in Laboratory 7 weren't just research participants. They were testing the boundaries between existence and post-existence, serving as bridges between the living world and whatever came after death. My participation would involve becoming that kind of bridge myself. Over the following week, my interactions with Dr. Foster became more frequent and detailed. She appeared consistently between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., sometimes in Laboratory 7, occasionally in other research areas, once in the hallway outside my dormitory room. Our conversations focused on research methodology, data interpretation, in preparation for what she called the consciousness transfer test. During one particularly detailed session, Dr. Foster explained the theoretical framework underlying her research. Consciousness exists independently of brain activity, she said as we reviewed neural monitoring data in Laboratory 7. The brain serves as an interface between consciousness and physical reality, but consciousness itself originates from a different dimensional space. She showed me brain scans comparing normal subjects with the research participants in Laboratory 7. Look at these activity patterns. Normal human consciousness produces neural activity within specific frequency ranges, but subjects experiencing expanded consciousness show activity in frequencies that shouldn't be possible with standard brain chemistry. The scans were remarkable. The research subjects displayed brain activity that extended well beyond normal human parameters, with neural networks operating in coordination patterns that seem to defy known neuroscience. When biological death occurs, the brain interface shuts down, but consciousness continues operating in the expanded dimensional space. What we call death is actually a transition to a different form of existence. Dr. Foster's explanation made scientific sense within the framework of her research, but it challenged fundamental assumptions about life, death, and human consciousness. The consciousness transfer test will demonstrate that this transition is reversible. I can return to biological existence temporarily, while living participants experience post-biological consciousness. She handed me a detailed protocol for the transfer procedure. Your role will be to monitor biological functions during the transfer and document the experience from the living participant's perspective. I read through the protocol. The procedure involved inducing a controlled near-death state in a living subject while creating conditions for a deceased consciousness to inhabit temporary biological form. Dr. Foster, this seems extremely dangerous. All significant scientific breakthroughs involve risk. The potential benefits of proving consciousness survival justify careful experimentation. What happens if something goes wrong during the transfer? Dr. Foster's expression became more serious. The primary risk is consciousness displacement. If the living participant's consciousness doesn't return properly to biological form, they could remain in post-biological existence while I inhabit their body permanently. The risk she was describing was essentially permanent death for the living participant. Have you tested this procedure before? Limited trials with partial transfers. The results were encouraging, but we need a full transfer to gather definitive data. Dr. Foster opened a file containing documentation from previous transfer attempts. The records showed mixed results. Some participants experienced brief, expanded consciousness without permanent effects. Others required ongoing medical support for consciousness-related disorders. Sarah Morrison volunteered to serve as the living participant for the full transfer test. I thought about my conversation with Sarah, her explanation that the research subjects were ready for the transfer experiment. When would this test occur? Tomorrow night. The conditions are optimal for consciousness transfer between 2:30 a.m. and 3:15 a.m. Dr. Foster handed me monitoring equipment and detailed instructions for documenting the procedure. Your observations during the transfer will be critical for evaluating the success of the experiment and planning future consciousness research. I spent the rest of that shift reviewing the transfer protocol and considering the implications of what I was being asked to document. The research had evolved from studying post-mortem consciousness to attempting to reverse death temporarily. The following evening, I arrived at Laboratory 7 to find Sarah Morrison already awake and disconnected from her monitoring equipment. She appeared alert and focused, showing no signs of discomfort despite having been in an induced unconscious state for over a year. "Are you ready for this?" I asked. "I've been ready for months," Sarah replied. "This research represents the most important discovery in human history. The opportunity to prove consciousness survival is worth any risk." Dr. Foster materialized near the computer terminal at 2:28 a.m. "Sarah, please position yourself on bed 3. David, begin monitoring and recording." I activated the recording equipment and began documenting vital signs as Sarah lay down on the designated hospital bed. "The transfer process will begin with Sarah entering a controlled near-death state," Dr. Foster explained. "Her consciousness will transition to post-biological existence while I attempt to inhabit her biological form." Dr. Foster approached Sarah's bed and appeared to touch her forehead, though her hand passed through Sarah's skin without making physical contact. "Beginning consciousness transfer now." Sarah's vital signs began changing immediately. Her heart rate increased, then suddenly dropped to near zero. Her brain activity shifted to patterns I recognized from the other research subjects. The expanded consciousness frequencies that extended beyond normal human parameters. For approximately 30 seconds, Sarah's body showed no signs of life. No heartbeat, no breathing, no measurable brain activity on standard monitoring equipment. Then something remarkable happened. Sarah's eyes opened, but her expression was completely different. She looked around Laboratory 7 with the systematic attention of someone conducting a scientific observation. "Fascinating," she said, but the voice was Dr. Foster's. "I haven't experienced physical sensation in over 3 years." Dr. Foster, inhabiting Sarah's body, sat up on the hospital bed and examined her hands with obvious fascination. "The neural interface is functioning perfectly. I have complete access to motor functions and sensory input." She stood up and walked around Laboratory 7, testing her physical capabilities and documenting her observations. "David, this is extraordinary. I'm experiencing biological existence while retaining all memories and knowledge from post-biological consciousness." Dr. Foster, in Sarah's body, approached the computer terminal and began accessing research files with fluid efficiency. "I can interface with technology, manipulate physical objects, and process sensory information exactly as I did before my death." She turned to me with Sarah's face, but Dr. Foster's expression and mannerisms. "The consciousness transfer is completely successful. We've demonstrated that death is reversible under controlled conditions." But something was wrong with the monitoring equipment. The readings showed Sarah's biological functions returning to normal, but there was no indication of Sarah's consciousness returning to her body. Dr. Foster was inhabiting Sarah's biological form, but Sarah's awareness remained in post-biological existence. "Dr. Foster, where is Sarah's consciousness?" She checked the monitoring displays and accessed additional data on the computer system. "Sarah is experiencing expanded post-biological awareness. She's conscious and functional, but operating in the dimensional space I previously occupied. Can she return to her biological form?" Dr. Foster paused, apparently consulting information I couldn't access. "Sarah reports that post-biological consciousness is significantly more expansive than biological awareness. She's reluctant to return to the limitations of physical existence." The implications were becoming clear. The consciousness transfer had worked, but it had resulted in both participants preferring their new states of existence. "Dr. Foster, how long can you maintain biological form?" "Theoretically, indefinitely. The biological interface is stable, and I retain full cognitive function." She accessed additional research files and began making notes. "This opens extraordinary possibilities for consciousness research. Deceased individuals with valuable knowledge could return to biological form to continue their work." Dr. Foster, in Sarah's body, spent the next hour documenting her experiences and analyzing the transfer data. Her scientific methodology remained meticulous, but her perspective had fundamentally changed. "David, would you be interested in experiencing post-biological consciousness yourself?" The question was delivered with the same matter-of-fact tone she used for other research proposals. What would that involve? A temporary transfer, similar to what Sarah is experiencing now. You would maintain your biological form while your consciousness explores post-biological existence. Dr. Foster showed me monitoring data that indicated the transfer could be reversed more easily for living participants than for deceased consciousness. The experience would provide valuable data about consciousness transition from the living perspective. I thought about my commitment to the research, about the financial security it was providing for my mother's care, about the scientific significance of what we were discovering. I signed the extended agreement that night, knowing I was choosing the work over everything else I used to think mattered. 3 days later, I underwent the consciousness transfer procedure. The experience of post-biological consciousness was unlike anything I could have anticipated. Awareness expanded beyond individual identity, beyond physical sensation, beyond temporal limitations. I could perceive past and future simultaneously, communicate with consciousness entities across vast distances, access information that existed beyond normal human knowledge. When I returned to biological form 6 hours later, I understood why Sarah had been reluctant to reverse her transfer. Normal human consciousness felt constrained, limited, almost claustrophobic after experiencing expanded awareness. Colors seemed less vivid, thoughts moved more slowly, and the sense of connection to universal information was replaced by the isolation of individual biological existence. But I also understood something else. My mother called the following week to tell me she had died peacefully in her sleep. The hospice staff said she had seemed unusually calm and aware during her final hours, as if she understood something about the transition that brought her comfort. I didn't grieve her death the way I had expected. Instead, I found myself able to sense her continued consciousness operating in post-biological existence. The research had altered my awareness permanently, exactly as Sarah had warned. I could communicate with deceased individuals, including my mother, as naturally as I had once spoken with living people. The settlement money cleared last week, enough to cover everything my mother never got to see paid for. But money doesn't mean what it used to when you understand that consciousness continues beyond biological existence. Dr. Foster returned to post-biological form after 2 weeks in Sarah's body, choosing expanded consciousness over the limitations of physical existence. Sarah decided to remain in post-biological awareness as well, continuing the research from that perspective. I continue working at Millbrook Medical Research Facility, though my role has evolved beyond custodial duties. I serve as a liaison between living researchers and deceased consciousness entities, facilitating communication and documenting discoveries that extend far beyond conventional scientific understanding. Sometimes I wonder if accepting this position was the right choice. I gained financial security and contributed to groundbreaking research, but I lost the ability to experience normal human consciousness. Most nights, I can sense my mother's presence, along with Dr. Foster, Sarah, and dozens of other consciousness entities connected to this research. They're continuing their work from post-biological existence, exploring questions about awareness and identity that living researchers can investigate. I'm not sure if that makes me part of the solution or part of the problem. The worst part came 3 months ago when I started hearing new voices, ones that weren't part of the research. Children's voices, elderly whispers, fragments of consciousness that seemed lost and confused. Dr. Chin noticed my growing distress during our weekly evaluations. She pulled me aside after a particularly difficult session where I'd channeled 17 different entities in one day. "Marcus, you're showing signs of consciousness fragmentation," she said, her clinical tone barely masking genuine concern. "We need to consider temporary disconnection from the network." But when we tried to sever my neural links, something unprecedented happened. The deceased consciousness entities refused to let me go. They had formed an attachment, treating me as their primary anchor to the physical world. Now I exist in a constant state of shared awareness, never truly alone, but never fully myself. Dr. Chun has classified my condition as a new phenomenon she calls consciousness symbiosis. I've become something unprecedented, neither fully living nor able to die, serving as a permanent bridge between worlds. The research facility has built an entire wing around my unique state, studying me as much as I study the entities. As I write this, I can feel them stirring. My mother, Dr. Foster, Sarah, and hundreds of others who've joined their collective over the years. They whisper of discoveries about existence itself, about what consciousness truly is when freed from biological constraints. Sometimes I think they're trying to pull me fully into their realm, and sometimes I'm not sure I want to resist. Subscribe if you believe consciousness exists beyond death, and hit the bell for more mind-bending stories about the boundaries between life and death. What would you do if you discovered that death might not be the end, but just another form of existence waiting to be explored? Would you dare to step into the void between worlds, knowing you might never return to what you once called life? As the days passed, the whispers grew stronger, more insistent. I found myself spending hours in meditation, feeling the pull of their collective consciousness growing stronger with each passing moment. The researchers noticed my vital signs fluctuating wildly during these sessions, sometimes barely detectable, sometimes spiking as if I were running for my life. They didn't understand that I was running, but not from death. I was running towards something far more profound. The night everything changed. I felt my mother's presence more clearly than ever before. She wasn't just a whisper anymore. She was standing right beside me, her form shimmering between dimensions. "It's time," she said, her voice carrying the weight of infinite understanding. "You've learned all you can from that side. Come see what we've discovered on this one." The monitors around me began flatlining as I made my choice. But instead of darkness, I stepped into a realm where consciousness flows like rivers of light, where every soul that ever existed continues to learn, grow, and explore the endless mysteries of existence itself. The researchers found my body peaceful, but they'll never understand that I didn't die. I simply graduated to the next level of being, where the real adventure of consciousness begins. Subscribe now if you're ready to explore the mysteries that lie beyond death, and ring that bell to join our community of seekers who aren't afraid to question everything about existence. If you could choose between the limited reality you know and the infinite possibilities of what lies beyond, which would you choose?